Welcome to the Daughter with Daddy Issues podcast. Here we get raw, real, and vulnerable. We bring the heart, the mind, the body, and the soul together as we explore the complexities and nuances of the father-daughter relationship. I'm your host, Surzana, and I'm so grateful to be on this journey with you. Follow and subscribe for insightful conversations where we share the spice, the sugar, and the salt, where we share lessons, a lot of laughter, some heartbreaks, and everything in between, where healing and learning becomes a collective experience. This is the Daughter with Daddy Issues podcast for the daughters and their fathers, because your story matters. Our story matters. Welcome, Shaheer. I remember I had told you about starting this podcast, and I asked you before I even recorded episode 1 if you will ever be a guest on my show, and you had said yes. And back then, I even did not record episode 1, and I was asking you, would you be my guest? Would you be my guest? And you said, of course you would be my guest. And then the fact that I started my podcast, I did all these episodes, and now you are here on my podcast as my guest. I can't tell you how much that means to me. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Surzana.
Welcome to the show, everybody. Shaheer.
It's a pleasure to be here. A real pleasure.
I'm so glad. I'll ask you all those questions, but
I'm
first,
looking forward to all of it.
For our listeners, if you could introduce yourself to us as much as you want, as little as you want. If you want to share what you do professionally, if not, that's fine. You know who you are, everything. Who is Shaheer? We want to know, who is Shaheer?
Who is Shaheer? That is a very monumental and heavy question. But perhaps I could give you a quick glimpse, given that it makes sense to know who your guest is. But I am, by profession, a policy advisor and just one of those boring 9-to-5 professional workers that has to do one of those to obviously, get somewhere in life. But beyond that, however, which is where I choose to identify myself with, I like to say I'm a traveller and a writer, and tend to travel to a number of perhaps unorthodox and off-the-beaten-track destinations and like to write about them. So,
how many countries have you been so far?
Oh, good question. The last time I counted, it was 35, but I haven't updated it in perhaps a few months now, so that might have changed.
So you have been to 35 countries.
Yes, that's right. At least.
And how old are you again? I'm sorry, it's a personal question, but I have to ask.
I'm 27.
You are 27 years old. You are a policy advisor, and you have traveled 35 countries. If that is not the definition of success, I don't know what is, Shaheer. I am sorry. I have to try the British accent and make a fool out of myself, but I have to say that is bonkers. Is that how you say it in the England? That is bonkers.
That was fantastic, Surzana.
That was bonkers. What do you eat? What is in your diet? Like, what do you feed your body, your soul, your mind? Because I am turning 31 in less than a week, and I honestly have no clue about what I'm going to do with my life. But wow.
I don't think many of us do, is the funny thing. We even navigate and coast through multiple challenges in life, and we then look back and think, wow, have we done all of this? Is this what I've become? And then when it's time, that rare moment when it's time to actually tell the rest of the world who you are, you then don't know quite where to start, because you know deep inside that your profession does not quite define you, even if the world likes to recognize you in that way. You know that your demographic characteristics are not enough to define you, but your connections and your experiences, on the other hand, and perhaps what you like to do in your spare time, but by that I mean what you actually like to do with your life, goes much further in defining you. And so that's why I use the terms traveller, writer, and also behind the scenes, I'm a policy advisor that
Mm.
deals with a whole host of other interesting issues, but perhaps not very much on the podcast. So
So, so
that's me in a nutshell.
I was so impressed when we met, and we had all of these philosophical questions, and you were teaching me things about war and culture and
I
academics
remember.
and every yes, and the justice system, and I was just like, wow. I was so glad to know there are intelligent and knowledgeable people here because we don't, it's anyway, not to digress. I wanted to ask you, I wanted to ask you when I first told you that I was going to start a podcast and I'm going to call it The Daughter with Daddy Issues. Do you remember what your thoughts were?
My first thought was, Sirzana, you have got to do it. And the reason for that is, whilst the title may sound quite raw and revealing, and quite, let's say, targeted, I knew that that is what the world needs to hear. We are products of perhaps our upbringing, our past. We are products of perhaps relationships that define us from a very early age, namely that of parent and child relationships. And having heard your story, Sarzana, I was amazed, intrigued, and impressed. And I guess my first thought was, I want you to share your story with the world. Not just me. I want the whole world to experience the enlightenment I was experiencing.
Are you proud of me?
Sarzana, that doesn't even need to be said. I think pride is an understatement. To say that I am proud of you would be an understatement. Let me just say this. From when you started this podcast till now, I am awestruck at, first of all, your delivery, your storytelling, the quality of the content, but also how much heart and love you have put into it. Above all, you should be proud of yourself, even more than anyone else should, because you are the one who has been the hero in this journey, or the heroine.
It feels very alone though. It feels
I'm sure it
it's
does. I'm sure it
it
does.
feels
Mm.
sometimes it feels like I'm walking through the woods and like, I'm being the hero in the journey, but I'm all alone. And I guess it's interesting I say that because while I say that, it also reminds me that we are our heroes and we also have to be our biggest cheerleaders, whether or not someone else is cheering for us. And that is hard to do.
I know,
That is
very much.
very hard to do. Um, but imagine a scenario where we have people cheering us, but we don't even know how to cheer for ourselves, right? So it's
Yeah.
almost like, so it's so it's almost like it's not an if to develop that. Oh, it's going to be hard.
Mm,
It is, but it's important to develop that. It's important to learn how to cheer for ourselves, and not fear that other people may or may not cheer for us. And that is hard. That is hard. That is hard. I must say, I suppose trauma
this,
does it to people.
mm,
Trauma can make people feel very alone. Um,
I
thank
know.
you.
I've been
Thank you
there.
for your words. Thank you for your words.
It's a pleasure. But I mean them. Just know this, that I say it from the heart.
And I receive it from the heart. I mean, to the heart. From the heart and to the heart.
That's where I targeted it. That's where I aimed my words. So I'm glad to hear that.
Shahir, how why is this topic close to your heart? Father wounds. Where does the story start?
Okay, very, very good question. I think now is a good time to perhaps unravel the layers of the story and perhaps which could also help listeners understand how we met in the first place and how we actually bonded. Because now I think what defines my story quite a bit, far more than perhaps other events may have done, is my relationship with my father, which I see as a very complex one. He passed away 4 or 5 years ago now, but
I'm
that
so sorry.
was when I was 22, yes.
I am
But
so sorry. That's very difficult to experience at that tender age of 22.
yes, yes, exactly. I was a fresh graduate. I
Mhm,
was about to perhaps embark on a colourful graduate career. I
mhm,
was, I had much to be excited about, let's say. I had a lot to, let's say, look forward to. But obviously, that was perhaps an inflection point in my life
mhm,
that I believe not only changed my worldview radically, but also perhaps my fortunes, everything I considered important, valuable, but also, obviously, my own inner psychology,
mhm,
own, let's say, uh, you could call it trauma responses
mhm,
that and adaptations that I had perhaps was forced to create, forced to adopt,
mhm.
to navigate the aftermath, which was ugly. And so,
Can I
yes.
can I pause you right there and ask, what you just said?
Mhm.
What you just said is, you know, I would assume there are so many people out there who may not have reached that point where they start to become aware of like what you said, trauma responses,
Yes.
from unresolved childhood experiences. So I am curious, do you remember at what time was the point when you were like, okay, this is a better question.
Mhm.
And please like answer to the level that you're comfortable. Would you say you have father wounds?
Whew. Would I say I have father wounds? I think the
Or,
simple answer is yes. The simple answer is a resounding yes.
and
If
why is that?
father wounds mean uh, a set of trauma responses,
Mhm,
pains, but above all else, griefs that result from both the passing away of my father, but also the experience, the rocky experience I had growing up in the household, then yes, because much of my personality, much of perhaps my mental state hinges upon those 22 formative years of my life, which obviously everyone's formative years of their life are in the first 2 decades. But for me, as I said, my relationship with my father played an outsized role in shaping me. And that's why I would say, yes, it is fair to say I have father wounds and by no means fully resolved either. And it might be helpful to perhaps go deeper into this actually now that I've alluded to this, now that I've affirmed it. But two main details were my father was largely absent. For no fault of his own, he had severe depression and mental health struggles of his own that I still am pretty sure, Sarazana, I still cannot grasp the magnitude of. I'm pretty sure there's a lot in his life
mhm,
that has not
mhm,
even been recorded or told to his loved ones. There's still things I uncover now about his depression, about the struggles he experienced in his life, being an immigrant to the UK, being an academic, being someone who had very high ambitions of himself, being someone who was highly accomplished. Uh, and I often sometimes use the phrase mad scientist to describe him because he really was quite a glowing scientist, but at the
mhm,
same time, very, very beleaguered by by perhaps the wolves in his psychology, in his
mhm,
mind, and that that's the first detail that I grew up largely with a very very perhaps depressed father, and oh, the scenes growing up uh, in my house. or perhaps the environment, the sense of perhaps despondence that was quite pervasive. I sometimes don't even like to recall those, but if I were to make a long story short, the environment in the house was always very, very dark and gloomy, and I wanted the attention of my father and the support, but due to obviously him, you know, extinguishing fires internally, he was unable to provide that. That's the first detail, obviously. The second one, obviously, well, the second one, which I don't think I have found full closure from yet because of obviously the unresolved questions, is his passing away, because that all happened very suddenly
Mm,
and was, as a result, directly and intimately tied to
mhm,
his depression. I don't
mhm,
actually want to say how he died because it is still very raw in
mm,
my mind, but I will leave listeners to make their own conclusions where depression, unresolved, gets
mm.
worse. People take things in their own hands in those situations. And unfortunately, my father died a death of despair. That, Zerzana, if I could convey the magnitude of heartbreak that results from seeing your own father, that you love so much, that you wanted to experience so much with, that you still needed the support of, that you needed so many years of, absence to compensate for, all of a sudden snatched away from you because your worst prediction came true. That is a gut punch, a body blow that very few modern day catastrophes could compete with. And so those two major details define the relationship with my father. Those are the two big gushing wounds I have that I would describe as father wounds. I know it's very heavy, but I very much do, and am shaped and defined by a lot of those events in the past and a lot of the lessons that I draw upon and the way I have recovered and found happiness as a result of those. I cannot separate the lessons and insights from my past experiences.
I don't think I will ever be able to acknowledge you and be grateful to you the way I want to. It will probably take me like multiple lifetimes. I am so grateful for you, to be here, for having the absolute courage, vulnerability, and I have to use the word, the absolute grace, the grace, the poise, the elegance by which you have carried yourself through your experiences, like you said, is at the level of very topmost modern day catastrophes. But
Yes.
the fact that you have articulated it so well, Shahir, I
I still
I
surprise
don't have.
myself,
I
Sarazana.
I am in shock. I am in absolute shock.
Mm, well, no, because when I look back, Sarazana, I still surprise myself, and it perhaps is instructive to the resilience
Hmm.
and condition in the human soul, whereby
Hmm.
from the outside, Sarazana, when people meet me, they see someone living a normal life, a
Hmm.
normal, happy life, traveling the world, writing
Hmm.
cool, moving stuff, and having interesting stories to share, and, doing the normal work, sleep, eat that everybody else does, commute, of course, pay bills,
Mhm.
and do something nice on the weekend. You get the idea.
I do.
And so from the exterior, the appearance looks very, very normal. That, however, it does still surprise me, though, how I managed to make that transformation from what, in immediate aftermath, felt incredibly bleak, incredibly, perhaps, destroyed. I, it, it was difficult to find a ray of light, no matter where I looked. It was incredibly difficult, and
How do you think it shaped you? You said something about, about the lessons and the insights from your
I
experiences. How did all of that shape you? What was the impact of it all, you know, that you are currently aware of?
very good question. The first thing, so in some ways, it shaped me to become stronger in the face of adversity, in the sense that now, Sarazana, an everyday setback, let's say I forgot something, I lose an item, I lose a valuable,
Hmm.
an everyday setback, let's say I am stuck in traffic, or
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
am experiencing some degree of disruption in my day, that doesn't
Hmm.
seem to faze me anymore. A lot of the
Wow.
things that worry
Yeah.
the vast majority of people, the masses, don't seem to
Perspective,
worry
right?
in the same way. Yes. Or even things like money worries, for example. They don't seem
I'm
to.
worried about money all the time.
Yeah, yeah, no. I still do. I still do think about money and worry about it, but
Mhm.
not to the same extent whatsoever
Mm.
that I
Mhm.
would have done before. Or, for example, I don't worry so much about material, the
Right.
material realm as much anymore.
Because
Um,
you have tasted the loss of what really matters, and that has helped you recognize what really matters. Like you've experienced the loss of what really matters, and compared to losing something that really doesn't matter, now it's not going to phase you as much.
but on the other hand, uh, so on the flip side,
Mm.
what it has made me extra sensitive to, hypersensitive to, is pain experienced by other people,
Mm.
particularly young children. Now, it pains me to a debilitating extent, for example, to see someone in pain, particularly if they fit two profiles. Either
Right.
they are children who have done nothing wrong to experience that pain,
Right.
or if it's a man of a similar profile to my father.
Hmm.
Seeing people who are experiencing pain that either resemble my father or remind me of my father, or are
Right.
children, particularly when you look at obviously what's happening in Gaza.
Mm.
That is beyond, I think, palpable. It's not palpable whatsoever. And I shut down in those moments. I shut down, and all symptoms of, let's say, grief come rushing back, like explosions of tears, for example, or losing interest in doing anything. If I
Right.
witness someone else's pain, especially if that person's pain either reminds me of what my dad experienced, or if it just feels so undeserved, where you end up asking yourself, why is the world so cruel? When you see the world being cruel to someone that did little to deserve it, then I tend to shut down in those states. And the trauma responses come rushing back in a ferocious attack. So, yes, that's perhaps another way it has shaped me, increased sensitivity to external pain.
So, on that note, I want to ask you, in your opinion, why do you feel having a healthy father figure, obviously nobody is perfect, but having a healthy, involved, engaged father figure is important in life? or important in the society, or
Good question.
I and I ask that because every time I ask that question, I kind of think that we really cannot change people, but it makes
Mm,
me very passionate about the importance of, people enrolling themselves in parenting workshops to learn how to be, a good parent. It's so important to learn how to be a good parent. And I understand that our parents did the absolute best they could. Like, I know that they did. But, in general, why do you think a man or a boy, a little boy, would need their father figure in their lives? A healthy father figure, a healthy, involved, engaged father figure in their lives.
to answer that question, let me bring in another snippet from my experience.
Yes, please.
So, for most of my teenage years, let's just assume my father wasn't around. I experienced, or I underwent the gauntlet of high school and university and
Mhm.
even what you in the States or in Canada would call middle school without clearly I have done a number of hops across the Atlantic, across the pond. But
Right.
yes, for that age period in my life, for that time period in my life, I did not experience, I did not have my father actively present or involved in my life. And obviously, nobody can replace your father. But as I grew older and discovered my own sense of agency, one of the life changing figures in my life that emerged during my university years and beyond, and particularly after the death of my father, was my uncle. My uncle lived a bit far away, so it wasn't as if he was down the road by any means, but he was accessible. And as he saw me grow up and perhaps not have the confidence that most blokes my age were sailing through life with, he got more involved, let's say. He became more involved in my life and would give me advice. We would have long 2-hour phone calls. He would counsel me through whatever little troubles, trifling troubles I was facing with interpersonal relations at school, at university. And then, and I cannot understate the importance of that, being able to talk to someone, confide with
Mhm.
someone openly,
Mhm.
and that person being there fully to help you, to listen to you in a non judgmental way, and
Mm.
ultimately make you feel safe, to
Correct.
affirm your, let's say, value to the world, to
Mhm.
reiterate your value to the world. And that is everything my uncle did and more, aside from taking me to spa days, to restaurants, for dinners out, for little walks around the town centre, around central London. And that was incredibly life changing for me. And I think that was one of the major corrective actions that I underwent to speed up my recovery. And as a result, if there's one thing that I cannot downplay, I cannot understate the role of when it comes to recovery in trauma, it is to have allies, it is to have people that are charitable in their generosity,
Mm.
understand you, that can form a protective umbrella, like a
Mhm.
canopy over you,
Mhm.
and say,
Mhm.
come under my wing. You've been through a lot. You have
Mhm.
much damage to absorb. Come under my wing for the next few months, years. We will
Because
do
healing is possible.
exactly. We will do this together. We
We will
will
do this
face the
together.
setbacks together. And the people that came to help me after what happened from all over the world, even my uncle from Canada, that I will be eternally grateful to. Uh, and which, by the way, is how I met you because I was
Yes, that's
a
why
teenager.
that's why I giggled. That's why I giggled if it wasn't for your uncle in Canada.
But he played yet a heroic role, another heroic role in helping me
Mm.
rebuild from the ashes, from the fragments of what remained. And whether it was my uncles, my cousins, my friends, friends that I had not spoken to in a very long time, came rushing back and saying, I'm here for you, Shaheer, in whatever capacity you need. And
If, sorry, go on.
no, no, that in a nutshell, I was about to say or sum up, was emblematic of the power of good people in
Mm.
helping you recover from shocks like that.
Hmm. What would 27-year-old Shaheer say to 22-year-old Shaheer if 27-year-old Shaheer was playing the role of, let's say, an older brother, a protective older brother? So if you
Oh,
were to be that you are the older brother now, the protective older brother slash mentor friend to your 22-year-old self, what would you say?
that question hits hard because it's interesting. While it has been a good 4 or 5 years since that catalytic moment that completely derailed the 22-year-old Shaheer, I still find a lot of both differences but also fundamental commonalities with that 22-year-old Shaheer. However, the question you have asked me is a very good one because I myself, I know I have changed from that point. What I would tell him or what I would do, I'm just trying to think now. The first thing I would say is life does get better.
Hmm.
Life really does get better. Your past, your worst moment, is not a template that will shape your future moments.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first thing I would say. The second thing is, I have realized as I've grown older, there are some things you can control, sure. But fundamentally speaking, the world that comprises other people, outside events, is something you cannot control. Trying to control it only puts you into further trouble. So don't try and don't punish yourself for something
Hmm.
that was never in your control. It is impossible. You can always find things you could have done better with the power of hindsight. Some people say hindsight is a wonderful thing. No, it's a terrible
Yeah.
thing. It's not a wonderful thing if hindsight is the one telling you, oh, you could have done so many things differently. Well, guess what? There is a whole manner of things that you could have done differently with the knowledge you have today. You could have perhaps driven through that road with a little less traffic that evening than this one. You could have gone to a cheaper superstore to buy your goods. You could have bought this color suit instead of that one.
If you have to
Um,
admire or praise 22-year-old Shahir or say something to him that you are proud of, what would you say?
wow, okay. That I am proud of. I would say to that 22-year-old Shahir, that Shahir, you have so much potential. Don't give up on yourself.
Mm.
That I am proud of the skills you are beginning to show, the
Mhm.
vigor for life that you have always had. I am proud of you for having gotten through some of the most turbulent phases of university, for
Mhm.
having submitted a very sizable dissertation that almost drove me crazy by the last few weeks.
What was it on?
Oh God, good question.
What
Completely,
was it on? We want to know. What was your dissertation on?
completely unrelated, but it was on nuclear deterrence.
Wow.
Yes,
Wow. I don't
exactly.
even know what that means. That's good. Wow. Okay.
It's funny, isn't it? I was studying nuclear deterrence. I was studying how to
And now you're a
stop
policy advisor. What a
nuclear
switch.
annihilation a nuclear bomb to the world. Little did I expect the world to nuclear strike me uh, through the passing away of my father, obviously,
Oh
which
my gosh.
it's almost like
Dark humor at the dark humor trophy
I know,
of the
it's almost
century goes to Shahir. Shahir, I have to say this. I am so, so, so sorry about your father's passing. I am so sorry. I I I know at the very least how it is to grieve the absence of
yes,
our fathers.
I know.
My father is not my father is still alive, but he's not technically in my life. Um,
Which is
and
very sad.
there were many occasions when um I sometimes would feel like, my father's gone from my life. Like, we don't talk, we don't
Mm,
meet, we don't see each other, and it's almost like he's not really there. And so I mentioned this because um, grieving is a huge aspect of healing.
yes,
The path to healing, oftentimes the path to self awareness and self transformation or growth. Sometimes, not sometimes, like most of the times, like
absolutely.
grieving is very important. And I have also learned to accept that a part of us may never be able to stop grieving, and that's okay.
Yes.
And that's totally okay. Like we can, we can keep that grief within us, and we can grieve the grief as much as we need to. And every time we grieve a little, we heal a little. And
I
I
fully
wanted to, yeah, I wanted to ask you how it has been for you. And a follow-up question to that would be, how do you feel owning our stories contribute to our journey towards a more authentic self, authentic life, a more healed state of sorts?
yes. Okay. And what was the first question? Sorry.
The first question was, I just wanted to hear about your thoughts on grieving.
Okay.
I'm not going
Great.
to ask you if you have finished grieving, because I don't even know if ever the grief ever ends, right? But 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 I guess what I'm also trying to dig is that sometimes the pain is so, so strong and overwhelming, and rightly so, that people may even shut down and not be able to grieve. And have you grieved? And what has it done for you, or its importance, or what does it look like for you?
Okay. So let's begin with the importance of grief, because I fully agree with you there on the need to allow the processes of grief to travel through you and your body. Because now, going back to my experience, for me, when I grieve, I still obviously grieve. Perhaps the frequency has reduced now. The intensity may have reduced, but it still exists. And when it happens, Surzana, I feel like grieving is a way for me to pay tributes to
Mm.
the how wonderful my father was and how much love I had for him. It was
Mhm.
a way to demonstrate that. That makes me feel better afterwards. I am perhaps operationalizing that love that I
Mhm.
had for my father, but I was not able to give. That's the
Mm.
first thing. The second thing is you are facing up to the reality of what life is about. That
Right.
you are here for a flash of a moment, a
Mhm.
very ephemeral chunk of time. And you're able to perhaps stare at life directly, eye to eye, and say, I see you, I know you. All masks are off, all rose tinted glasses are off. you see life for what it truly is. Yes, those masks will come back on, as will the rose-tinted glasses afterwards, when you get back to your everyday life activities and rhythms. But the acknowledgement, the reminder of the true character of life is also in many ways healing,
Mm.
because you are now under no illusions that about the real deal of life. So it is very important to grieve, because we will all, I mean, grief is odd, I think. Everybody has a very different relationship to grieving.
Mhm.
It
Yes.
provides different lessons and insights and revelations about life to the
Yes.
grieving subject. And
Yes.
the ways in which people grieve are
Are
also
different too.
different. Yes.
Yes.
It's
Very,
not,
very. That's a very good point. The
but
way people
everyone's
grieve.
grief is valid and legitimate.
Mm.
And
That
there
is
is no
powerful.
competition of grief. There
Yep.
is no relay race or
Nope.
scoreboard of grief.
Yeah. And sometimes, sometimes I guess there is no right or wrong as well,
It's
depending, but still,
absolutely
I understand, some people might self-sabotage, as a process of grieving. I've done
sure,
that, but,
sure. So have I, of
so
course.
yeah, self-sabotage as, when we grieve, self-abandonment as well when we're grieving. Like,
Of course.
it is a process. It is a process. It is a journey. It sometimes the way we grieve may not be very graceful.
Sure,
and
sure.
it's a learning, it's a journey. It's absolutely a journey, right? And I'm so glad you mentioned that because um nobody ever gave me, like, like a manual on how to
Yes.
grieve. Sure, I can look it up on Google, but does that how it really works? um
No,
so
that's not how it works, in the sense
that's
that,
not that's
exactly,
definitely not how it works.
you have
That's not how
to
it works.
go through that journey.
You have to.
The whole point is the
Yeah.
fundamental point that you have to allow yourself to experience all the ups and the downs, the highs and the lows, the yeses and the nos.
And when you step into that journey, it's also very unknown. Like, it's an unknown territory. Like, you don't know what is to unfold in this grieving process. Like, you don't know what's going to unfold. You don't know how it's going to unfold.
Exactly.
And and it is a hero's journey as well,
Of course.
going through the grieving process, allowing yourself to grieve. When somebody allows themselves to grieve, so many things can show up, so many things can, pop back
Indeed.
up. And uh, you know most times or not, we may not be fully equipped to know how to deal with it when it's, like, right on your face. And it does happen like that, right on your face. I was yesterday, I was at an event, and one of the ladies there was talking about how her father bought her this foot massager, so she apparently takes it to work every day.
Right.
And, she has her foot massager there, and she's like, it just gives that extra comfort to her feet.
I see.
So when she was just saying that, and she was considerably older than me. So she was like at least 15 years older than me.
Mhm.
And I don't know what happened to me. I felt this huge, like this pang, like this snake's fang, like get into my heart. Like, it felt like a
Wow.
piercing pain in my heart. I don't know why. I don't know why. And I don't know where it came from. And then I started shaming myself, like, oh, am I jealous? Like, why am I feeling sad? Like, why am I suddenly feeling so much pain in my heart? Like, I shouldn't. Like, you shouldn't, Surzana. Like, stop. And I'm like, I'm not being able to stop. And I literally had to leave the room just to, like, gather a few breaths and just distract my mind. So yes, when you allow yourself to be vulnerable, to feel, to grieve, sometimes you never know where it's going to come up from, right?
Oh,
The
yes.
triggers, right? The triggers. So you got to be ready for all of those and sit with those triggers and grieve those triggers and hold and take care of those triggers like they're little children,
Yes.
because the little children within us are hurting. Um,
Correct. And
Shahir, yes,
as as I like to say sometimes, we need the passage of time to give us the experiential data
we do.
to find how our internal grief behaves.
Yeah.
But ultimately, what you've said there, and I couldn't relate more to it, I still sometimes in the supermarket have to avoid certain aisles. I have to avoid certain cereal packets or packaging because
Mm,
tiny thing, or sweet packaging, for example, or some brands, tiny little things that you would not expect. I mean, if ever I went shopping with my brother, which I did on a number of occasions, and he would see me very religiously avoiding certain products without explanation,
mm.
that, you see, grief does not behave rationally. Grief
Mhm.
does not follow patterns. It does not follow a set and stipulated logic.
There
No,
is no formula to it.
there is none. And that is another important acknowledgement you have to make. Otherwise, you hamper and hinder your recovery. And so I think this is one of the many lessons that I would have told my 22-year-old self alongside the other ones I have told that I have expressed over here.
So, what would you, let's say you're giving, advice, brotherly advice to your 22-year self. What would you tell him so he can better prepare himself for grieving? Because as much as, everybody's processes are different, I also acknowledge that sometimes, when we hear it from someone else, some words of affirmation, if you want to call it, it
Yes.
helps. It makes one feel validated to some extent and seen, and then maybe perhaps a little bit understood. So, what would you tell him about, the process of
Of
grieving, the
course.
importance of grieving, and that would you tell him that it will slowly get better?
There are two things here. There is the empirical side of it, of grief, the truisms of grief, like grief is irrational, that your expectations of grief must be flexible. Then there's also the practical side, whereby you surround yourself with the right people. You do everything you can to find professional sources of support like therapy, which I believe also played a game changing role
Mhm.
in getting
Mhm.
me here. There is that practical side where, again, Sarzana, I caveat what I am saying with the fact that this is solely based on my experience and that I am not an authority on grief.
Of course.
Because ultimately, everyone will experience it very differently. Some people will not. It will have perhaps impacted them to such an extent that practicalities will not matter. But of course, uh, in my experience, they did matter, and I still had perhaps some energy to actually say, okay, there are some solutions that I can seek help from. There are some resources that I can seek help from.
Mhm.
Let's use
Mhm.
them. The other,
Mhm.
however, is abandon all shoulds. The word should is toxic. Nobody
Mhm.
should tell you, nobody can tell you how long you should grieve for,
Mhm.
how you should grieve for, provided that you do not harm anyone, of course.
Right.
Your grief is yours to experience. Own
Right.
it, live through
Right.
it.
Right.
Let the pain shape you into
Mhm.
that person, into that hero that you are always destined to become.
How do you feel right now as you are owning your story? I'm not saying that you haven't owned it before, but I guess, how do you think owning our stories empowers us? And I say that because I ask that because one of my purposes for my podcast is for people to be able to come and own their experience in such a public manner, which I I find very few things more brave than that.
I think the first thing to say here is
Did I say very few things or more things? I find very few things more brave than that. Okay, yes, tell me.
no, I think I heard exactly what you said, so which is few,
Okay,
but
great.
which I also agree with. But beside that, I think the power of owning your story. The first thing I say is it's hard. It's not easy in any way because our stories sometimes lack coherence.
Mm,
Pain can sometimes jumble with whatever coherent narrative our story could have taken. But the wider point, however, on why it's important to own your story is that there there isn't going to be another you
mhm,
that will ever exist. All of your loved ones, they will never be able to replace you. What you provide the world, what value you provide other people, what light you give to your surroundings cannot be replicated by anyone else. They will be their own. They will have their own beautiful story, hopefully. But yours, unfortunately or fortunately, cannot be replicated by anyone else,
right,
cannot be retold or re experienced by anyone else.
right,
That's yours. That is one thing that you will never share, that will be exclusively yours. And there is a power in that. There's a power in knowing this, acknowledging it, and using it to propel you into the life that you are yet to live, into the experiences that you are yet to uncover, into the conclusion, into the let's say, lessons that you will impart, into the conclusion that you will write, and the lessons that you will impart.
And as you're saying that, what's coming to me, the fact that nobody will know your story better than you do.
Of course,
Nobody will know your story better than you do. And if you don't acknowledge your own story, how
of
can
course,
other people do the same for you? How can other people
exactly.
do the same to you? We have to learn to acknowledge our own story. And, all my life, most of my life, I remember wanting other people to validate my story, wanting other people to validate me. And only not too long ago that I started recognizing that I am running away from my own story. I am even perhaps to a
Yes.
lot of extent ashamed of my story. There is a sense of shame that I sometimes feel to my story. And that is one of the reasons why I absolutely loved when you said, don't let anybody tell you what you should have done, could have done, would have done. Of course, it is important to kind of, look back and learn from our patterns and grow from it, but it definitely can be done in a way that propels us forward instead of pulls us back or keeps us in shame. um I really, really, really want to thank you, Shahir, for being
It has
here.
been wonderful. It has been strangely quite therapeutic and uplifting.
Mm.
I think when people say you are your own best teacher, you are writing the book that you need to read. There's a lesson there, and I'm already thinking. Let's say everything I have said is already having an impact on me now as well, and perhaps giving me that added dose of clarity. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my story, above all
Of
else.
course. Of course. Oh my gosh. Absolutely.
The funny thing is,
Oh,
I'd already
wow.
wanted to do this for quite a while, and
Wow. How are you
this was on
feeling?
my mind.
How
So
are you feeling right now?
I am feeling accomplished. I am feeling a little lighter.
Hmm.
and a bit more optimistic in the sense that
Hmm.
what I have said, I believe in. And so, as a result, otherwise I wouldn't have said it, obviously. And
Of
so,
course.
it's my
Of
duty,
course.
first and foremost, to live those lessons. And I therefore hope that I can continue inspiring people from my story and everything I have learned from it.
Shahir, I honor your story. I honor your vulnerability.
As do I
I
yours, Sarazana.
I honor your experiences. And I feel right now very happy to honestly and very humbled to be able to, have this podcasting that I'm trying to do.
And you're doing
Any
very
messages? Any messages for my listeners? Anything at all? Other than, telling them to follow me and subscribe me and refer me to their friends.
wow. Apart from everything I have said so far, the message I stick to the most canonical lesson in my book of lessons, let's say, is that your future may be shaped by your past, but is by no means predetermined or, in an absolute sense, defined by it. That no, as bad as things may have been, they can be as good, if not better. There is no
Mm,
rule in the world that says that everything, let's say, traumatic that you've been through is going to become the template or the default of your future life experiences. Find solace and comfort in that. In the end, we all want to be happy. We all want to experience happy moments in our life.
yes. 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 Any message for me?
Message for you really is keep doing this.
Mm,
Keep doing this. Don't stop. I'm a big listener myself. I'm an avid listener myself. Find much in terms of value and enlightenment from what you do.
thank
So
you.
keep doing this, please.
Hey, all. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Daughter with Daddy Issues podcast. I am so thankful that you were here. We hope our candid conversations have resonated with you or simply provided a moment of connection. If you enjoyed our show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, or leave a review. I welcome and invite you to share your thoughts, feelings, stories. If you're interested in having a conversation or being a guest speaker, please email me at thedaughterwithdaddyissues@gmail.com. Or you can follow and DM me on my Instagram handle at thedaughterwithdaddyissues. Please stay tuned for the next episode, and remember, you are not alone. Because every story deserves to be heard, especially the ones with some sugar, salt, and spice. And I thank you for being part of my story. See you soon.